And now we get to the main event of the evening for the UFC Bantamweight Championship of the World between the former UFC Bantamweight and Flyweight champion in Henry Triple C Cejudo coming back to the UFC and challenging the current Bantamweight champion in Aljamain, the Funkmaster Sterling. This is a great matchup. This is really a good fight, and this is, in my opinion, the best example and the truest example of a 50-50 fight in mixed martial arts. I feel like either man can win this fight, and I don't really like a betting angle from either perspective. I think Cejudo's like minus 115, Sterling's like minus 110. I mean, it's pretty close in terms of the odds, basically a pick 'em, and I think that those are the right odds. I think that this fight could literally go either way. Look, let's break the stats down first before we get into everything. 5'7" for the champion in Sterling to 5'4" for Henry Cejudo. That's a 3-inch height advantage for Sterling, along with a massive reach advantage, I believe. 71-inch reach compared to a 64-inch reach for Cejudo. So he's going to be at a 3-inch height disadvantage along with a 7-inch reach disadvantage. The reach is going to be a problem considering that Sterling, for the most part, when he fights on the feet, he likes to fight long, but he will close the distance, but he'll use his punching combinations to close the distance to be able to go for takedowns, to shoot a double, work his way back up to the body lock, and try to take the back. They call this man the Funkmaster. He's basically the human backpack, and he's called himself that as well. If he gets on the back of Henry Cejudo, it's a problem, and it's a problem for anybody in the division. You see what he did against TJ Dillashaw in his last fight at UFC 280. He was able to take the back of the challenger in TJ Dillashaw, flatten him out, and ground and pound TKO him in the second round. And that was in a fight where, yes, TJ Dillashaw came in injured. He injured his shoulder. He popped his shoulder out early in the first round. I feel like that does have an asterisk next to the title defense of Aljamain Sterling. The second fight against Petr Yan after the disqualification title win in the first fight at UFC 259, which took place at UFC 273, is a fight that I thought Petr Yan could have done enough to win the decision. However, it was a split decision for Aljamain Sterling to retain the UFC Bantamweight Championship, and the reason he won that fight was because he used the activity on the feet, the awkward striking, the 1-2s, the hooks, the lead elbows, to use that to close the distance into takedowns, the front kicks to the body, inside and outside low kicks to finally close the distance, get Petr Yan to overcommit on a shot so he could duck under, work for a takedown in a double leg, get him up against the cage, get him to give up his back as he tries to wall walk and work his way back up, and then lock up the body triangle and be the definition of what he calls himself, the human backpack in the Funkmaster Aljamain Sterling. He was able to flatten out Petr Yan, ground and pound him. Once he was on the back of Yan in the second fight, that was a wrap. I mean, on the feet, though, he does seem to get caught, you know. He's been knocked out before by Magic Marlon Moraes, who at this point it doesn't look like a great loss considering what Marlon has done lately, even over in the PFL. However, at the time, Marlon Moraes was a killer on the brink of a title shot in the bantamweight division against the man who Sterling is fighting in this fight, in Henry the Messenger Cejudo, or Triple C Henry Cejudo. Cejudo has the win over Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, where he won the flyweight championship. He then defended it against TJ Dillashaw, so they have a lot of common opponents, and he was able to TKO TJ Dillashaw after he made the scientific weight drop down to the UFC flyweight division, caught him with a big right hand, spun around, took his back, and knocked him out in round one in the first UFC event on ESPN. I believe it was the first ESPN Plus event, actually, for the UFC. I think when you look at the stats, which we'll continue with, obviously Sterling's going to have the length, the reach advantage, and he's going to be able to keep Cejudo away from him, landing kicks, front kicks, teeps, low kicks, elbows, overhands, hooks, uppercuts. Like, he's going to try to use the long-range weapons to keep Cejudo on the outside and stop him from being able to get into the grappling exchanges. Because even though I think Cejudo is a better wrestler, and he's going to be the better wrestler in this fight with great takedowns, great inside reap, trip takedowns like he used against Mighty Mouse Johnson in the first and the second fight. Good reaction time, even if he gets taken down. Scrambles are second to none. I don't think there's any realm in where Sterling is going to be able to out-wrestle Cejudo, but I could see a potential possibility where Cejudo gets into a bad scramble, gives up his back for 1 second, and then he has Sterling on his back for the rest of the round. The only way that Sterling wins this fight, in my opinion, is by getting on the back of Cejudo, getting in the body triangle, either flattening him out with the hooks and really putting his hip pressure down and TKOing him, or jumping on the back, getting into the body triangle and locking up a rear naked choke submission like he did against Corey Sandhagen to earn himself that UFC bantamweight title shot, where he started the fight off, closed the distance, pushed Corey back with the pressure, jumped in for a takedown. Corey Sandhagen tried to whizzer. As he whizzered, he went back to defend the body lock, ended up giving up the whizzer, which allowed for Sterling to jump on his back, lock up the body triangle standing up, and then look for the rear naked choke. Corey Sandhagen defended on the one side, then Sterling was able to switch the grip and switch to the other side, which allowed for the choke to be sunken in because Corey left an opening and then he was submitted and choked unconscious. So you don't want Sterling on your back. Any bantamweight in the division, you don't want Sterling on your back. But I don't really think that there's any way that Sterling will out-wrestle Cejudo. Cejudo is going to be the better wrestler, the better scrambler, the better sprawls, the better reactionary takedowns, the better takedowns off the pressure of Aljamain Sterling, who's probably going to look to close the distance and get inside. He's going to have better reactionary takedowns and just overall better wrestling ability. I mean, an Olympic gold medalist in Henry the Messenger Cejudo in freestyle wrestling. I believe it was freestyle wrestling. Maybe it was a different kind of wrestling, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. The wins and resumes for both of these guys we'll get to in a second, but let's continue with the stats. So 3-inch height advantage to a 7-inch reach advantage for the champion in Sterling. You look at significant strikes, 4.7 significant strikes landed per minute for Aljamain Sterling, 3.92 for Henry the Messenger Cejudo. Significant strike percentages, 51% of significant strikes landed for the champion to 45% landed for Henry Cejudo. 2.18 strikes absorbed per minute for Sterling to 2.77 for Henry Cejudo. Pretty neck and neck in terms of the stats. I mean, 51 to 45, 4.7 to 3.92, 2.18 to 2.77. When it comes to the defense, Cejudo is better defensively, at least when it comes to the statistics, not so much the stylistics. At 61% striking defense for the champion to 65% striking defense for Henry the Messenger Cejudo. Continuing to break down the stats. Let me just make sure we are running here. All right, cool. Continuing to break down the stats. Grappling is where, I feel like a lot of people are going to take a lot of stock. 1.98 takedowns per 15-minute fight for Sterling. 2.12 for Henry the Messenger Cejudo. So very close in terms of these stats as well. Takedown accuracy, pretty close from either man. 24% takedown accuracy for Aljamain Sterling and 33% accuracy rate for Cejudo. Takedown defense, 93% takedown defense for Henry Cejudo to 41% takedown defense for Aljamain Sterling. That's something you're definitely going to have to touch on when you break down the winner of the fight and how the fight potentially plays out. Submission average per 15-minute fight, 0.89 for Sterling to 0.2 for Henry Cejudo. So the more active jiu-jitsu artist, the more active submission hunter is definitely going to come on the side of the champion in Aljamain Sterling. When I look at the fight, I mean, you look at recent opponents for both men. You got Dominic Cruz for Henry Cejudo. That was his last fight in the UFC back at UFC 249, the first event that took place during the COVID era when they took that little 1 month, 2 month hiatus from UFC events during the beginning of COVID. He was able to defeat Dominic Cruz via second round TKO at 4 minutes and 58 seconds of the second round. And before that, he had the title defense the title win for the bantamweight division against Magic Marlon Moraes at UFC 238. Prior to that, it was the UFC flyweight title defense at the UFC Fight Night 143 against TJ Dillashaw, where he dispatched of Dillashaw in 32 seconds of the first round. But again, that was Dillashaw making the weight cut to the flyweight division for the first time. He did it scientifically, he did it the right way, but he was severely depleted, so you do have to take that into account for this win over Dillashaw. Then it was the split decision win over Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson at UFC 227 in August of 2018. The last time we saw Henry the Messenger Cejudo inside the UFC octagon was May 9th of 2020. So it's going to be about 3 years since we've seen Cejudo compete in mixed martial arts, but he's still been training. He's been training alongside a former opponent, actually, in Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, one of the best fighters of all time, who's coincidentally going to be competing this Friday, the night before UFC 288, and defending his one championship flyweight title against Adriano Moraes for the third fight. The first time, Moraes knocked him out with a knee to the grounded opponent. Second fight, Demetrius Johnson was able to finish Moraes with that beautiful, step back southpaw left hand, stepping forward and landing a knee as Moraes rebounded off the cage for a beautiful knockout. This is going to be the trilogy bout as they're both 1-1. So it's kind of funny that they're both competing the same weekend, and this is Cejudo's first fight in about 3 years inside the UFC, and his first fight in 3 years in about in mixed martial arts altogether. Out of his 16 victories, he's only lost twice. One was the TKO loss to the man who's competing at the One Championship main event in Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. And then, like we said, Cejudo would obviously come back and win the rematch. And then he lost a decision to Joseph Benavidez, a split decision at UFC, the Ultimate Fighter 24 finale back in December of 2016. So the last time that that Henry Cejudo lost was back in December of 2016, but he also hasn't competed for almost 3 years. So will ring rust be a factor for Cejudo? I do think it will be a factor, but I do think that the fight IQ of Henry Cejudo and the way he's able to make adjustments on the fly is going to be a big problem against Aljamain Sterling. Sterling does make certain adjustments, but for the most part, he's going to be walking forward with one game plan. He's going to over pressure you, get you on the back foot, land awkward striking combinations, put a lot of volume on you, and then allow for you to overcommit on a strike on a counter so he can counter your counter with a takedown, or even shooting a takedown, getting you to defend, and then shucking you forward to get your back, lock up the body triangle, and look for a submission. But he does have a lot of volume on the feet. He is a very active striker, and if Cejudo does have any form of ring rust, there is a possibility that Sterling can push him back, get on the forward pressure, land the awkward combinations, 1-2, left hook, step forward into southpaw, to a right elbow in the new stance, closing the distance with a hook, getting you to commit, and then shooting it on your hips. He disguises his takedown entries with either punches of his own to be able to exploit your high guard defense like he did against Piotr Jan, or he strikes you to be able to get you to counter. So then, like we said, he can counter the counter with takedown attempts and wrestling attempts. He's not going to be able to take down and out wrestle Henry Cejudo. Even with the layoff, Henry Cejudo is a much better wrestler in terms of fundamental and technical styles of wrestling. But Sterling doesn't have to be the better wrestler in order to get him in grappling positions to be able to exploit him and potentially finish him. Because if Cejudo gives up his back for 1 second, even if he's in a scramble, they get in the over-under position, maybe Henry goes for an inside reap, he misses it, Sterling's able to sprawl out, Cejudo goes to reshoot another takedown, turns the corner, goes for a single leg, he gets the single leg, but then Sterling's able to take the one hook, which he has, which is the single leg, and then take the other leg, swing it around to the opposite side, and lock up the back of Henry Cejudo in a scramble, and then get to the body triangle, look to soften him up with strikes, and potentially set up, like we said, the rear naked choke, which is the funky backpack strangle, and coincidentally, the best finishing move, I guess you could say, for the champion in Sterling. On the feet, like I said, adjustments on the fly, that goes to Cejudo. Better technical striking, that goes to Cejudo. Volume striking is going to go to the champion in Sterling, but the low kicks from the inside and outside legs, since he was able to land the low kicks on Dominic Cruz, and a guy who's very hard to chop down, but he seems to get easier to low kick as his career continues, Cejudo was able to land low kicks so much in that fight, which slowed down Dominic. Then he was in an exchange up against the fence. Dominic was feinting, switching his stances, hip bumping. Cejudo went like this, or you can't see me obviously, but he moved his head forward and kind of like juked out Dominic Cruz to get him to think that he was going to come forward so that Dominic could then slip and roll to the opposite side. As he feinted and rolled, he was able to time the roll of Dominic Cruz with the knee right up the middle from the rear leg, knock him down, and then jump on him for the TKO. The killer instinct for Henry Cejudo is much higher than the champion in Sterling, in my opinion. If Sterling gives him a chance to finish the fight, Cejudo will jump on you and put you away. Like, he is relentless. He will come forward. If he gets a chance to finish you, he's going to finish you. Now, if Sterling gets the back of Cejudo, he's going to go for a finish, but I also think he's a little bit more passive to the point where he might, sacrifice a potential finish to then get control time and try to rack up control time in the rounds. But I do think that Cejudo's the better scrambler. He has better reshoot ability. Even if he misses a takedown, he can reshoot on the opponent. He has better reaction time. He's better on the feet. I feel like he's more technical. Using that karate style stance, he might be able to chop the inside and outside low kicks on Sterling, who has been low kicked in the past before and who has been taken down by a guy like Piotr Jan inside the clinch, body lock takedowns, inside trips, catching the low kick, sweeping the other leg. I feel like Cejudo's going to be chopping those low kicks to slow down Aljamain Sterling and then allow him to catch the kicks of Sterling, and maybe the takedown defense isn't going to be as strong because he's going to soften up the kicks off of the punch feints to land the inside and outside low kicks on the stance switch fighter in Aljamain Sterling. I think that the better punching combinations, the crisper technique, I should say, is definitely on the side of Cejudo. Better wrestling is on the side of Cejudo. Better jiu-jitsu is on the side of Aljamain Sterling, but I think the better scrambling ability and better ability to get superior positioning against an opponent and the speed of the ability in the scrambles all goes to Cejudo. I mean, he's an Olympic gold medalist. I think he's a gold medalist. He might be a bronze medalist, but I think he's a gold medalist. You know, the highest level of wrestling competition, Cejudo was able to gold medal in the Olympics. So you're never going to lose that wrestling ability. Will ring rust be a factor? I think he might be slow to start in the first round, but like I said, Cejudo's able to make adjustments. He's able to make adjustments like he did against Magic Marlon Moraes after getting chopped with low kicks and landing, getting hit with big bombs against Marlon in the first round, and then eventually finding a way to close the distance, work the Thai plum in the Muay Thai clinch and land knees, elbows, knees to the head, knees to the body, slowing down Marlon, pushing him back, showing him that he wasn't going to be scared by the boogeyman in Magic Marlon Moraes, who coincidentally was the last man to finish Aljamain Sterling, knocking him out with that switch kick off the level change. I think the knees of Henry Cejudo on reactionary takedown defense, where Sterling might shoot a takedown, get hit with a knee. We've seen that happen because the kick that Magic Marlon Moraes hit Sterling with was coincidentally a knee because he wasn't able to fully extend the kick, and it's almost the same exact knee trajectory that Cejudo was able to catch Dominic Cruz with off the feint into the roll. So I think you could see a scenario where Sterling shoots a bad takedown, Cejudo's able to read it, maybe he feinted, got Sterling to shoot the takedown, and then lands a knee and it knocks out Aljamain Sterling. I think when it comes to finishing upside from a submission side, you have to go with the champion in Sterling. When it comes to finishing ability from the knockout side and striking side, I think that definitely comes from Cejudo. But when it comes to making a prediction, I think I'm going to go with Henry Cejudo. I know that some people are going to pick Aljamain. I know I've picked against Aljamain in every one of the fights I've broken down for him on this podcast, but I'm going to pick against him again. I think that all the areas where Sterling is so successful at are areas where Cejudo's not going to give him the keys to open those doors to find those routes to victory. I think there is a possibility, like I said, they get into a scramble. Sterling's able to grab the back and get control time, potentially locking up a rear naked choke and finishing him. But on the feet, the better technical striker, the better ability to make adjustments, the better footwork, the better in and out movement, the better low kicking ability, the bigger punching power. It all comes from Cejudo. The better speed with the strikes, it all comes from Cejudo. He's faster, he's crisper, he's more technical, better in and out movement, better footwork, better ability to make adjustments. It's all Cejudo. The only way that Sterling wins this fight is by getting Cejudo to get caught in a bad scramble or, missing a punch, getting low kicked, potentially getting in a front headlock, spinning to take the back. But I don't think he's going to be able to out-scramble Sterling, I don't think Sterling's going to be able to out-scramble Cejudo. So when it comes to the pick, I'm going to go with Henry Cejudo to become the new UFC bantamweight champion. And I'm going to go with him to finish Aljamain Sterling via TKO in the third round. I think the first round will be competitive. I think maybe Sterling gets the first round because Cejudo's trying to make the reads. But like I said, once this guy gets you hurt, he's a dog on a bone and he's relentless. And that goes to his wrestling ability. That goes to his mindset. This guy is one of the greatest fighters of all time, holding victories over Dominic Cruz, TJ Dillashaw, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. The list goes on and on and on. Sergio Pettis. I mean, he's beat some of the best fighters in the world. And the fighters that he beat, although Dominic Cruz is an exception, Mighty Mouse is a champion in bantamweight in one championship. Sergio Pettis is the Bellator bantamweight champion. So the guys he beat didn't fall off and, really just, fall off after those fights is what I'm trying to say. For Sterling, he beat, Magic Marlon Moraes. Not Magic Marlon Moraes. What am I saying? He beat TJ Dillashaw. He was injured in that fight, so that's an asterisk. He beat Petr Yan the second time. It was a very close fight. I thought Petr Yan could have got the decision, but Sterling had more control on the back, more control from the body, triangle, and ground and pound, and he got 3 out of the 5 rounds. So he won that fight. The other thing about Sterling is he's going to slow down in the later rounds. I don't think we're going to see Cejudo slow down in the 4th and 5th, even though he's on this layoff. I know he's been training. I feel like he takes this extremely seriously and he's got one of the best minds in the game. And that's going to be on display this Saturday as he finishes Aljamain Sterling by TKO in the third round, becoming the new UFC bantamweight champion. All right, that's it for my UFC 288 predictions, preview, and breakdown. This podcast will be available on all audio podcast platforms. That includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Breaker, Stitcher, and many, many more. The podcast will then be uploaded to YouTube in a full UFC 288 breakdown and then individual fight videos as the weeks continue, so you can watch certain fights if you don't want to check out the full card. You can leave a review for the podcast on Apple Podcasts by searching the name of this podcast in the Touch 'em Up podcast, which you already know if you're listening to this. And the YouTube channel is the same name as the podcast, and I will put a link to the YouTube channel in the description of this episode. Touch 'em Up podcast on YouTube. You can find me there as well. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Double M. I'm out. Enjoy the fights this weekend.